We start. It's 12:01. We'll promise to have you out of here by 5 tonight. That's a joke. Those of you who know me know that I have these very ill-timed sick jokes, but no, we'll have you wrapped up here by a quarter to the hour, hopefully. Unless we get into a really good discussion, which sometimes can happen, but very, very worst case scenario, we'll be done at the top of the hour. So thanks for joining us. Sadly, we're doing leadership in turbulent times yet again. This webinar has been around for a little while. Obviously, it's been updated. We continue to make improvements on it. But we first launched this concept of leadership in difficult times and sort of talking about some of the things we're going to talk about today in the session back in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Some of you may remember that. It was a very tumultuous time. Looked like the U.S. economy was skating right over the edge. In fact, it did. We fared a little bit better here in Canada, but of course, living next door to a neighbor like the United States, they sneeze, we catch a cold. And that's certainly what happened back in 2008, 2009. And then not too long ago, seems like a long time ago, but 5 years ago, we brushed this off again when we were hit with the COVID crisis, and that was uh, just epically weird and strange and like nothing we'd ever seen before. And everybody was just so uncertain about what was going on. Today, I dare argue that unfortunately we need to be brushing this off again. Leadership in turbulent times. Not that it isn't, leadership isn't important, but more so now than ever before because of the turbulence we're in right now. We've got a trade war brewing. Certainly, there's a lot of bluster. Certainly a lot of back and forth. We're dealing with Donald Trump as president again. Love him, hate him. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but what I can think I can say without getting into too much controversy is he's not your usual guy. And because of that, he does engage in sort of atypical behavior of US presidents, where he's now targeting Mexico and Canada, two of the United States' biggest trade partners, and threatening tariffs, which is, if you told me this, 6, 12 months ago, I've been like, nah, it never happened. But apparently it's supposed to happen on Saturday. We'll wait and see. It was supposed to happen on Inauguration Day. Didn't. So we'll wait and see. We're not sure exactly what that means. Nonetheless, it has forced a lot of back and forth. We have our own internal conflict here in Canada now, where the Premier of Alberta is going one way, the Premier of Ontario, well, not sure what he's doing today. Apparently, we're doing an election because, hey, when the world's in chaos, let's throw some more chaos at it. All of this is leading to a prognosticator saying, 500,000 jobs lost if these tariffs go into place. Ontario stands to be hit probably the hardest of all the provinces because we're so integrally tied to the U.S. manufacturing sector. GDP decline of, knocking 1-2% off GDP, which is not really strong to begin with. Probably heading to recession. People have thrown around the D word, depression. This is all very real emotion, and it's frightening. Let's just put it right there. At the same time, we're seeing all these, CPI inflationary measures that they're predicting, GDP losses, etc., taking us 3 to 4 years to dig ourselves out from this. Should this go through? So that's what we're looking at. Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. This is suddenly the new word of the day. And then I just thought this last point was, and then our prime minister, who's been, less than popular for some time, apparently has exited stage left. So not only do we have a crisis, but we also have a void of leadership in the country. So that's a lot. That's a lot going on, and the buzz is that this is borderline crisis. You couple that with the reality that it was existing before all this started to shake down, before Donald Trump found a new word and fell in love with it called tariffs. We had another problem, and it still exists. Okay, so. This is our population in Canada. Some of you may have seen this in previous webinars that I've done, but every moment I get, every time I get the opportunity to share this, because we're not talking about this and we ought to be. If you look at this graph, it's from Statistics Canada. I don't lay claim to it, so it's not the prettiest graph. The fonts and whatnot are a little bit wonky. But look at the data. The data is this. If you look at that purple line, okay, you'll see the baby boomers back, 20 years ago, 23 years ago in 2002. There's where they were. What age group were they? They were in that 40 to 55 age range. The typical age range we see our mid-level managers and senior leaders take. That's the typical demographic age group for them. Now, what's happened? Well, if you look, they've starting to age out. Now they're up in the 65, 70, 75 age range, and they're leaving our organizations en masse. Well, what's the big deal there? The big deal here is when you look at the orange graph, look at the how many fewer or how fewer people there are taking up those roles. That's why our managers and our mid managers and leaders are so stressed out because they're doing more work with less people. That should be scary enough. That should be enough to make you want to go, holy cow, this is a super crisis. But I'm going to point out the one that I think should keep you awake at night. And that's this part down at the bottom. This is the next generation of workers. I'm not sure what we're going to call them. Some pick your favorite letter of the alphabet. But this is the next group coming out. And there's few of them in 2002 and even fewer in 2022. These gaps that are existing down at the bottom here, that's the next group of employees. Those are the folks we need to rely on in order to keep our organizations going, in order to keep our society, dare I say it, going, paying things like employment insurance and CPP and those sorts of things. And there's a whole lot fewer of them. Now, maybe the argument could be made that, well, if we go through a recession, maybe that'll wash itself out and we'll just have the right number of people and whatnot. I doubt that's going to be the case. This is why we've been pushing for immigration, because there's three ways to solve a problem of not enough people. Number one is you just poach and steal from your neighbor. Well, that's just musical chairs. You just keep perpetuating the problem. Number two, we can make more babies. It's kind of fun, last I heard, but here's the rub. 20 years before they come online. So that's a long tail kind of solution. It's not going to solve the immediate. And the third one is immigration. But immigration now has become a dirty word and an awful word and something we don't like to talk about. So where are we going to be? This is a crisis. It's not as real as tariffs, which are coming in a few days, potentially. It doesn't seem to have as big an impact because it's a longer, more longitudinal kind of problem as opposed to an immediate one. When you get hit with a price tag that goes up 25%, it declines demand and your demand falls out pretty quickly. But these are two really big things. So whenever you're faced with a crisis, as the saying goes, never waste a crisis. Horrible thing, sounds like a terrible thing to say, but really, in challenging times, we really have to question the reality that we're in. There are no right or wrong answers, but what we have are two phases to every crisis. One is what we call the emergency phase, and that's the phase where you're trying to get stabilization. And when you get through that, then you move to the adaptive stage. And that's really what I want to focus on today is the adaptive phase. What typically happens when we're faced with a crisis? What typically happens when we start to internalize this information is we go through, well, some really nasty kind of reactions. And here's what they are. Rational thinking, logic always prevails, not always, but most of the time, prevails during times of calm. We can think clearly. We're able to do good, deep thinking. We're able to analyze the situations. We're able to dissect problems. Emotional thinking prevails during times of panic or, dare I say, crisis. Panic, fear take root, and they derail our ability, especially as leaders, to get to that adaptive phase. It's almost like learned helplessness. And that is when we believe that our behaviors are irrelevant and have no impact whatsoever. And then we just sort of feel there's no option for us. And sadly, right now, it sort of feels that way when it comes to tariffs in the US and being applied on Canadian goods. But the flip side of this is there is opportunity. And the question becomes, what is the opportunity in this? Our default is to go negative. 67%, two-thirds of all the words in the English language have a negative connotation to them. We are inherently negatively driven. Look at our language. So we thrive on that. So which sold newspapers for years. You may remember those things. We used to go and you get them out of a newspaper box or get them delivered to your front door and you'd read a newspaper. Now we read it online. It's just a whole lot quicker. But news sells really well when it has a negative headline. But if the news said, hey, the world's really great and the sun's coming out today, be like, whoa, what a terrible headline. We're motivated or we're inherently driven towards negativity. So that's the problem that we have to get past. And that is instead of saying, what's going to go wrong? How is this going to make our GDP go down? How many jobs are going to be lost? And said, what's the opportunity in this current situation? Because I believe there is. I believe there's an opportunity in this. So leading through transition is probably a better title for this webinar as opposed to turbulence, but turbulence gets you to sign up and come and watch. So, but it's really about how do we lead through transition more effectively? There's a couple things we want to do. First, we have to start with yourself. Most people have seen the demonstration, the safety demonstration when you get on an airplane for the very first time. They will go through the emergency exits. They will talk about, what to do in the case of an emergency and where the exits are. But this one is the one that always is interesting. Should the cabin lose pressure, an oxygen mask will fall from the ceiling above you. You want to reach down, pull on that mask, and put it over yourself first. Why? Because you're of absolutely no use to anybody else if you're asphyxiated. So if you're struggling to put a mask on your neighbor and you end up running out of oxygen and you're dead, you can't help anybody. So the analogy is you have to start, leaders have to start with themselves when you're going through transition. Now that sounds selfish, but it's not. It's actually not selfish. There's three things that we need to look at. What do you got to start doing? What should you stop doing? And what should you continue doing? Then you're in a better position to help others. So that's what we're going to focus on. What do we need to start? What do we need to stop? And what do we need to continue? And what has been proven both through the crisis of 2008, 2009, and most recently with COVID is these methodologies work. They make a difference for our leaders. So let's get into it. First of all, what do you need to start? I need to start with a plan and you need to focus your mental energies. Let's break that down a little bit. First of all, a plan. Nature abhors a vacuum. In the absence of a plan, in the absence of a well thought out strategy, nothing happens, or nothing happens that's well thought out. So, examples, simple things that we can do. What are the three critical goals for my day or for my week? What are the things that I can accomplish in that time frame? And then communicate that plan with your teams, with your colleagues, with your customers. What is the plan if it's applicable? And then be vulnerable. Ask for help. Don't get burned out. That chart, the demographic chart, where we have fewer and fewer mid-managers than ever before, they're burning out at an epic rate because they're being asked to do so much with fewer and fewer people. Reach out and ask for help. It sounds simple, sounds easy, but it's very difficult for people to do, especially leaders, because many of us in leadership feel that we have to rise above those follies, if you will, for lack of a better term, that befall our other human beings on the planet. If we're in a leadership role, we must be, out of a different ilk. We got to put that aside. We got to put that aside and focus on the fact we need help too. That doesn't mean you're shirking your responsibilities. It doesn't mean you're any less of a person. It means you're real. And it also shows vulnerability. And if you know anything about Patrick Lenciani's work on the five temptations of a leader, one of the ones that he talks about consistently is not being vulnerable. Vulnerability builds trust, and you will have a much more epic team when that's the case. But I think the other thing we have to focus on is where are you putting your mental energies? I love two by two matrices. It can solve so many business problems. And this is one that I've used time and time again and remind myself and our team on a regular basis. On the one axis is what you can control, what you cannot control. Those are our columns. What are our rows? Our rows are you're thinking about something that an issue or you're not thinking about it. So if you're thinking about things that you can control, that are inside your control, that you can actually do something about, that's awesome. That's constructive problem solving. That's opportunity seeking. But if, on the other hand, you're thinking about things you can't control, well, that's endless worrying. And I'm going to throw my dear mother under the bus right now, but this is my mom in many ways. She constantly is worried about the weather. I have no control over the weather. And no control over the weather. But she's just every day. What's the weather? Oh dear, my, and it's going to be super cold. Oh, it's going to snow. Oh, what are we going to do? It's endless worrying that just drains your energy if you have no control. We can't control what Donald Trump's going to do. We have no control over that. None, zero. So to spend all your mental energy worrying about, thinking about what he's going to do is endless worrying. Thinking about the things you can control is what are the strategies we can do to react to that and to plan for that. That's different. It's a nuance there, but it's very subtle, but it's important. Now, if you're not thinking about things that are in your control, well, that's a missed opportunity. Okay. Maybe living in fantasy world, maybe it's denial, whatever it is. But if you're not thinking about things that are in your control, it's a loss. That's really a loss, and it's tragic in many, many ways. And then if you're thinking about not thinking about things that you cannot control, well, that's just really good conservation of energy and good understanding and good reality. This is an epically powerful tool to use as leaders. Where am I spending my energy? Be honest. Because sometimes we're in that endless worrying box. And as a result, we end up just chewing up a lot of time. Or, dare I say, I'm going to go back here, we're in that missed opportunity. So take a time out, take a few minutes. Just ask yourself, where am I spending my mental energy? Where am I where am I putting my focus? It's a really, really powerful tool that can be very, very helpful for a lot of people. So, at the end of the day, what we say is, hey, regain a sense of control. Grab a piece of paper or use your tablet, whatever your methodology is for recording these kinds of things. What are things that are inside my control? What are things outside of my control? Just do a quick narrative on this. Ask your teammates, ask your colleagues, hey, what do you guys think? What do you folks think about this? Are we in the right place? Because when you shift your center of control to I'm in charge, I am an internal, that's when hey, I have choices, I can take actions, I can do something about this, you know, and my personal efforts will result in an outcome. And if you are more focused on external things, then it tends to lead to blame and weakness and fate and wishful thinking. It's my fault. I should have done this, or I can't do that because it's impossible, or it was bad luck. We know from studies that well-being and resilience, that an internal sense of control, a belief in your ability to shape your life leads to better coping, breeds better confidence. We'll always experience stress, but we bounce back faster from setbacks and we achieve things more readily when you have an internal sense of control. So what can I control? And then ensuring that that is something that is in your internal sense of control as opposed to it's outside of my control. The good news is we can change this. We can change this. It's a learned behavior. And a lot of monitoring, self-talk, we can change it. Because at the end of the day, our beliefs control our thoughts. Our thoughts control our feelings or influence our feelings, and our feelings are what drives our actions. So if we start to shift the self-talk from this is impossible, we're going to lose 500,000 jobs, this is going down the Swanee River, to we've got this and we can do this. I have the abilities, we have the experience, I have the knowledge, we can get to a better place. So that's super awesome, super epic. So start that if you're not doing it already. I know for many people that's not something that they're doing. So let's get that started. So what do we need to stop doing? This one's so seemingly obvious and painful in some ways, but it's something that is I have found working with leaders and even in my own life stop doing some things that are sort of taking away. Number one, this is not business as usual. This is really different. Okay, the demographic change we're about to go and we're undergoing right now, this is really, really, really different. And it's not something we've seen before. We've not had situations where we have been at a loss for talent, nor have we been in a situation where the president of the United States seems to be looking upon our country from a lens of punitiveness or an enemy. It's very odd. We've never seen this before, or at least not in recent history. This is really strange. We're supposed to be the best of friends and the best of trading partners, and we're being penalized in ways that we don't understand. So it's odd. So it's not business as usual. It's, no, don't worry about it. It's business as usual. This is a bump in the road. This requires some adaptation on our part, some creative thinking. So remember we said at the very beginning, crisis and response to it can be emotional or logical. When things are going smoothly, logic prevails. When we're in emotional crisis, all that beautiful, rich, oxygenated blood drains from our brain and we go to flight or fight because we're ready to rumble or we're ready to run like hell. So we're not thinking clearly. We got to get to thinking clearly. One of the really awesome ways to get to thinking clearly is turn off the news. News. Uncertainty makes us crave more information. So we end up spending more and more time looking for news updates. You know, what's going to happen? What did they announce today? What's going on? And then throw into the mix now, Ontario is going to go into an election. What's going on there? And what's going on? We don't have a leader we have a prime minister, but he's a lame duck prime minister. What's going on there? And what's going on in the world? And we look for that. It's good to be informed, but we know the consumption of negative news causes stress and distraction. So just like you put on noise canceling headphones, put on news canceling headphones, if you will. Change the ratio. Start your day in empowering ways, solution focused news. If you don't like that there's so much negative news, don't forget you vote with your clicks. When you Google something and you want to know whatever it is, Google and all those algorithms are watching your every move. Well, they're not literally, but they're tracking it. And then they've got technology will say, oh, Terry Gillis really likes to hear news about immigration roundup in the United States. Let's send more of that the next time he logs in. And then suddenly your inbox gets flooded with news that you last looked at. If you start down one pathway, it's always amazing how much it starts to come in. It's like, hey, you go online and you say, I'd like to find some, I don't know, dandruff reducing shampoo, and suddenly every part of your social media is telling you about that. It's a real thing. A couple of websites that may be of value to you. A group called All Sides, which is a news organization that's a collation of news. It grabs news from what we might consider right-wing media, from center bias media, and left-wing media, and puts them side by side so that you get a balanced approach. It's really fascinating to see that, and it creates a much more interesting consumption of news. Or ground news, which will actually show you where media biases exist and blind spots, or Flipboard, where it allows you to create content from various sources as well. Also, things like Polyfacts, Snoops, media bias fact checks. These are all sources that allow you to determine where you might be getting news that's exceptionally biased and news that's a very negative. And say, in terms of negative news, here's what we know there too. We've known for years that when you hear negative news, it instantly increases your stress level. There was a study done years ago. I want to share this with you. I'm a bit of a science guy. I love science and learning about these sorts of things. 110 participants, they were blindly placed into two conditions. One group watched 3 minutes of negative news stories before 10 o'clock in the morning. The second group watched 3 minutes of solution-focused news. So different. This is important because the second group did not watch, saccharine-laden stories about, oh, it's rainbows and lollipops and unicorns and the sun will come out and all that sort of stuff. No, they were watched stories of resilience or stories about success stories and whatnot. Two of the videos, they included inner city kids working hard to be successful in a school competition. The other one was a 70-year-old man who got his GED after failing the test dozens of times. Then the participants were emailed 6 hours later. 6 hours later, they're emailed and asked to fill out a survey um, about what, within 2 hours of receiving it. The survey contained a battery of positive psychology metrics to gauge things like stress and mood. The results, and they reran the analysis several times because the effects were much more significant and dramatic than they had thought. The folks that had 3 minutes of negative news, 3 minutes of negative news, had a 27% greater likelihood of reporting their day is unhappy 6 to 8 hours compared to those presented in the positive condition. So what you start your day on dictates your day. So if you're starting with negative news and reading about all the horrible things in the world, you're probably going to end up in a negative state. The majority of our news stories today showcase problems that we can do little about. That, what am I thinking about? What can I control? Okay. So there was another one, a research that did studies on people with optimism that was done in the 1980s. It was had to do with salespeople at Metropolitan Life. It's one of a very well-renowned study. And they found that those salespeople who reported higher levels of optimism had greater success than those with pessimism. That seems sort of logical, but still along the same lines. So when we are consuming negative news, don't don't think it isn't having an impact. So we need to stop doing that, I think. That's a game changer. It's so small, but it can be huge. Stop the doom scrolling. It will put you in a better frame of mind. And when you're in a better frame of mind, like we started with, when you're calm, when things seem reasonable, you're able to have a much more logical, thoughtful analysis of the world around you, as opposed to crisis, red alert, emergency. You're devoid of critical thinking. So that's a great thing I think that we can do. Now, what is things we can continue? What can we continue to do? I believe this is a great opportunity to reinvest in your culture because as the saying go, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Strategy is important, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is such a foundational piece in our organizations. It's how we do things, how we do things. And this has shifted dramatically, especially with millennials and Gen Zs entering our organizations. They're coming into our organizations with different expectations, different desires, different wants. Ignoring that, you do so at your own peril. They're looking for different things. This is the rise of things like DEI, which is now being thrown in the dustbin because Donald Trump doesn't like it, because he's misinterpreted the intent of it, which is sad. We're seeing things like ESG rising, the focus on those areas, and this is being driven by the folks coming into our organizations that are a lot younger than this guy. So it requires us to come up with new ways of working, even if it's just temporary as we go through these crises, right? We need to look at things, how we can be supportive of our teams going forward. So, celebrating, checking in with people, not checking up on them. How are people doing? Building a culture of inclusiveness and wrapping our arms around everybody that we're supportive of one another. I think these are the things that we can do. Communication becomes important, obviously. Asking questions, getting opinions, not professing that you have all of the answers, but ensuring that everybody is included in that. Okay. Critical pieces that help you establish and build your culture. Now, shameless self-plug for us, and I don't like to do this, but some people get befuddled by culture. You can actually measure it. We have a tool that does this. We can help you understand not only what your employees think your culture is now, but what they would like it to be. And then you can build your strategies around that because it is a nebulous thing. Culture is a nebulous, unknown kind of how do you wrap your arms around? How do you define it? We sort of got a feeling for it, but it's hard to put into words. You can actually measure it, and that becomes kind of exciting to be able to build a strategy around that. Now, the other thing, again, as always, continue to focus on your people. There are four universal needs that everybody has. The four universal needs that everybody has. Hope. People have to have hope. They have to have trust. They need to have compassion and they need to have stability. I remember watching the movie The Hunger Games, and I'm dating myself now because that's been quite a few years ago now. But there was a scene in that movie that just really reinforced this notion. And it was President Snow. Those of you seen it will know what I'm talking about. And he said the thing that he feared most about Katniss Everdeen was that she created hope. And he talked about how hope was one of the most epic powers among humans. So your folks need to have hope. Hope comes from positivity, optimism, and saying, yes, things will get better. Things will improve. We can get there together because we can. This is not insurmountable. Humans have faced bigger challenges in the history of humankind, but we're being rattled once again, and it just feels like we just, to use a hockey analogy, it just feels like we got off the ice from practice and now we're back out in the game again because we just got through COVID a couple of years ago. We're being tested once again. But what we know from COVID is we're resilient and we will do well. We will get through this. Trust becomes important, compassion, stability. So, empathy, huge, wraps those four things up in a bow quite nicely. And I believe that we need to start embracing chief empathy officers in our organizations. So sorry for the chief executive officers who are going to steal your titles on you, but a chief empathy officer, I think, becomes super critical. People want to feel as if other people get them and can experience them. Everybody's going to be feeling stress. Everyone's going to be feeling confusion. Most of us are going to have fear. And you want to know that the people in leadership roles, like many of you on this call, have got their back. Sadly, when we look at the research on this, less than half of our employees feel that their boss, their leader, their supervisor has their back. Less than half. So when people feel a sense of safety, though, trust and empowerment and growth, productivity shine. So there's room to improve there, I believe. We can do this. So, Chief Empathy Officer, your employees are human. They have real fears, real anxieties, just like you. It's okay to be vulnerable and say, I get that. I understand. I'm feeling it too. That makes you real. Communication. I mean, any webinar you do on anything related to leadership is going to come back to communication. Early and often, honest, transparent, highlighting hope, trust, and compassion and stability. Okay. There's a crisis communication fellow that I follow, and he says that the key to any crisis in communication is to communicate often and to communicate early. Don't wait until maybe yes or maybe no, that Donald Trump imposes tariffs on Saturday. Okay. But now say, we've got a plan. We know how to get through this and communicate that over and over again. Even if you're still trying to understand what the extent of the problem is, or you're trying to understand how you're going to respond to it, be honest, right? So get back to purpose. Our purpose, our raison d'etre, our organization exists to do the following things. Remind people of that. Purpose is one of the three key motivators for most people. It's mastery, autonomy, purpose. Let me get good at my craft. Give me the right amount of autonomy, but purpose is what gets people excited. Don't lose sight of purpose. So transparent, honest, often and early, and highlight that hope, trust, compassion, and stability. Empathy. Become that chief empathy officer. I love this quote. The void created by the failure to communicate is soon filled with poison, drivel, and misrepresentation. Communication experts and specialists will tell you this. I don't profess to be one, but I've heard them speak about this many, many times. And that is never let a story get in front of you, get in front of the story. So, communication, super uber critically important. Communication is all about listening. We know this. Open your ears. You got two of these, one of these. Let's use them appropriately as the ratio as they were designed on our bodies. Talk less, listen more, especially those folks on the front line. They know what's going on. They got their ear to the ground. They're hearing it. Listen for them. Listen to hear what they have to say. Communication is also being clear, clear, concise messages, transparency, and don't be afraid to address those emotions and offer support. Look for ways to tailor the work. We may be asked to do more with less, as there may be constrictions on our revenues and organization because demand for Canadian products and services declines. We may be forced to think about doing more with less. Some people may be asked to exit our organizations, and that is okay because we can support them and help them find new opportunities. Okay. But when people are the ones that are left behind and they're in our organizations and two of the six people in the department they're in have exited now, instead of six people doing it, four people are doing it. Look for ways to tailor the work, doing more with less. Job craft. This is such an incredibly epically powerful tool that we have at our disposal. Don't shoehorn people into job descriptions. Work together with them to figure out how the work gets done. Let's not get constrained by those job descriptions. Now, all my HR friends on this call right now are throwing up red flags going, you can't do that because we've got pay grades and pay scales and all sorts of things. We can have a conversation about that. Let's not get hemmed in by things when we have other challenges we have to face, like how we're going to get out of this. Give employees control. Mastery, autonomy, purpose. Control is all about a little thing called agency or autonomy. Most of us really desperately want to be able to do our thing the way that we think and know how to do it. And so our leaders become coaches to help us guide and find our way, not dictating, not telling, not declaring, not saying you must do it this way. Give the control back to your employees. They will shine and you will win. Again, most of you are probably doing this. Continue to do these sorts of things. Super awesome, super epic. You'll get great results as a result. Decision making. Okay. This, try not to overreact, slow down, take your time. We have a webinar coming up in February. I'll get to it at the end, called Next Level Leadership. We're really excited to be bringing this to market. And it's about the tools and techniques that we need to get to next level in our leadership. And one of the things we talk about a lot in that webinar, and there's a subsequent training program that goes with that, is the importance of having effective decision making. And one of the keys to that is slowing down, taking your time, being thoughtful. Sometimes you got to rely on the old gut, but sometimes the gut can lead us down the Swanee River. So try to pump the brakes a little bit when you have critical decisions to be made. Try to reduce the unknowns for your folks. Right now, there's a lot of unknowns. Okay, predictability and leads to greater stability. So, try to give as much direction, minimize the ambiguity, be forthcoming with information, be transparent. Okay. When people start to hear rumors, hey, I heard that there's layoffs coming, or I heard we're not doing really well, address those straight on. Get rid of those unknowns. Then nothing breeds more contempt than a really nasty, gossipy rumor. So those are the things I think we can continue to do. Now, the next ones are probably going to get a couple of eye rolls. I'm going to be honest. But these ones, there's a ton of research on this now that's available to us, which basically proves that our parents were right, for those of you who heard this. And this is, I'm warning you, there's going to be some groans on this one, but it works. Get some sunlight. One of the most difficult parts about living in southwestern Ontario in the wintertime is that most of the time it's cloudy and snowing. And it really, really is draining. A day like today, well, it was a day like today. There's still some brightness. Sunshine is so epic. Part of the reason we head south in wintertime, yes, it's warmth. Of course, we're gonna get away from wind chills of minus 750 Celsius. But part of it is sunlight. It brings out the best of us. So when you see those opportunities, seek it out. I know that sounds so trivial, but it's incredibly epically powerful for human beings to get sunlight. There's lots of reasons for it, but it just helps our mood and makes us much, much more optimistic. I notice on sunny days, I'm just a nicer person. So you can imagine what I'm like in the middle of winter. Dear God, I pity my staff. So I pity the team here that work with us. So really cool. Now this next one, oh my goodness, this is all our parents screaming. It's like, really, Terry, you're going to get on a webinar and spend time on a webinar and tell me I should be getting plenty of sleep? Yes, absolutely vital. There's so much research done on sleep now. When you get sleep, it reduces the varied hormones that drive up stress. It helps reduce stress because it's getting rid of things like cortisol and those things that cause stress to go epic. When you don't get enough sleep, it wreaks havoc on the body. Your blood pressure spikes. You're more apt to gain weight because the hormone that regulates appetite and food, there's not enough it created. It gets created in sleep, and so there's nothing there to say stop eating. So it causes that to happen. That's why we have stress eating. Sleep is such a powerful, powerful tool in our toolkit and so easy to do. It's really, really helpful. Get rid of your smartphones at nighttime. Blue light's destroying your circadian rhythms. I could go on. I'm being a little bit too parental in the moment, but it's super awesome and it really, really works. When you get enough sleep, it's epic. And if you think that 6 hours is enough sleep, it's not. If we were to take all of you, no, well, that'd be weird, but I'd take each of you and put you into a room with no outside reference to time, like lights, windows, no clocks, no watches, nothing, and let you just sleep, you'd probably sleep somewhere between 8.5 to 9.5 hours, suggesting that when all the other things in our life are removed, that's what we should be aiming for. 7.5 hours is pretty good. Less than that, you're probably in trouble. And of course, you know the next one's coming, don't you? Yeah, you can sense it. It's like, oh, really? Yes, I'm going there because these things are super helpful for us. And let's get lots of exercise. It doesn't mean you have to be on the left-hand side and go get a gym membership and get all the Lululemon gear on and whatnot and put the earbuds in and hit the treadmill. It can be something as simple as the folks on the right-hand side of this slide, which is basically just going out for a walk. Walking has been proven now, or at least the science is really reinforcing. It can be as impactful as hitting the treadmill or jumping on the stationary bicycle because it just creates great energy in our bodies. And at a time when we're under crisis, when we're looking at threats and whatnot, we want to be ready to be able to tackle this and have the best fuel in our body to be able to do that. So with that, I think it's only appropriate that we end with this. I don't know about you, but I'm proud to be Canadian and I know that we're in for some tough times right now. We're under the microscope, but Canadians have always been and always will be resilient. We got this. Let's go get it done. So I thank you for your time. And we're ending 1 minute earlier than I had hoped, which is great. We might have some questions or whatnot in the chat. I'm not sure. I'll turn to my colleague Marissa to tell me what's going on there. I thank you for joining me today with this. As always, these are our thoughts. We'd love to hear yours. Like this is a time when we got to get together and share thoughts and share different ideas and whatnot. So we look forward to hearing from you. There may be some things there you go, holy cow, Terry, you're way off on that one. Let's talk about it because we'd like to continually learn as well. So I thank you. Marissa, anything in the chat box we need to take a look at?